So hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for this Sustainable Equine Management webinar. My name is Terry, and I will be your host for today's workshop. I'm a longtime dressage rider and trainer with a passion for regenerative land management. I'm also a longtime volunteer for the Daily Acts organization, which along with our partners is sponsoring this event for us today. This webinar is being recorded and you will automatically receive a link to viewing it in the coming days. I will also be sending out a resource sheet for you all. If you give me just a moment, I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, hopefully you can all see that screen. This is today's agenda. You may have seen this when you first entered the webinar. The logos you see pasted around the lower edges are of our partners who have done a great deal to help us to launch this equine workshop as a webinar for the first time this year. Bay Area Barns and Trails has very generously awarded us a grant to be able to produce this event at low cost. Horses for Clean Water, Sonoma Resource Conservation District, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, the San Francisco Regional Water Boards, the Equine Land Conservation Resource, the Ren Horse Council, and Pony Club have all partnered with Daily Acts organization and made such a big effort to get the word out. So I wanted to take just a moment to acknowledge them. And I'm going to bring up a new slide here. Trying to deal with all the tricky things with Zoom. Okay, so for those of you who aren't familiar with us, Daily Acts is a Sonoma County, California-based educational nonprofit that teaches people and communities how to live more sustainably by reclaiming the power of their daily actions. We do this by offering tours, talks, webinars, workshops, and volunteer installation events to provide hands-on experience with low-tech, low-cost, people-powered solutions to environmental degradation and climate change. So for example, we offer hands-on day classes on rainwater harvesting, how to install home gray water systems, how to transform lawns into drought-tolerant gardens and food forests, and how to reduce waste and conserve energy and the like. We are fortunate to do this work in partnership with local municipal agencies, private businesses, nonprofits, schools, individuals, and volunteers such as myself, bringing you this webinar today. Okay, and before I introduce our main speaker, I'm going to do one more screen share here. I want to go over just a couple of the Zoom features that you should have available to you. Hopefully, if you don't have sound, you're reading the screen share right now. I've muted all attendees, but you all will all have control over what you hear at the bottom of your screen. If you have a question at any time during the presentation, please type it into the Q&A box that is located at the bottom of your screen. You will have the option to ask your questions anonymously if you prefer, and we will be answering each question at the end of each speaker's share. I have a poll I'm going to launch right now so that we can kind of get to know our audience a little bit better. I have this set up as an anonymous poll, so we cannot see who is responding or what you're saying. So if you just take a moment to provide the answers, I'm going to launch it right here. The answers that are most applicable to you. And I'll just give everyone a moment to fill that out, and then I'll show everyone the results. I'll give you just a few more moments. Okay. I'm going to share the results. So it looks like we have quite a few people anyway from out of state. Most people currently own their own horses, either where you live or on your own property. We've got, and these results are showing the percentage, not the number of people. Looks like 55% have horses, 1 to 5 acres, own 1 to 5 acres, sorry. A few less, 5 to 10, and 1 more than 50 acres. Is your horse property commercial or non-commercial? Most people have non-commercial properties. And how many horses? Some of you own actually more than 3. So I'm going to just keep this up here. I'll stop the share, and now I'm going to like to introduce to you our awesome speaker, Alayne Blickle. She's going to be our main presenter, and she will be doing so from Nampe, Idaho. So Alayne, if you want to come on.
All right, great. Thank you, Terry. And
I left the poll up in case you wanted to comment on that.
Okay, yeah, I will. And feel free to, if you have any comments throughout this, or if you need to stop me for any reason, I'm comfortable with that, no problem. You know, I was thinking as you were introducing this, it's amazing because this was 1 year ago. Was this presentation was my last workshop and presentation in person in California there with everyone. It was the last time to travel. And since then we've all become well acquainted with Zoom. So thank goodness for Zoom. And thank goodness that we can still get together, and like that, the poll I think is awesome. So at least we can interact a little bit. And yes, I appreciate knowing a bit about everybody. So it's good to know that there's a few people that are not in California and a few people that are commercial, but most are commercial. It's interesting because most people are on 1 to 5 acres, which is what I find any place I go in the United States anyway. But there are a few people who have more acreage. And some even have a lot of acreage in this class. So that's awesome. And then the number of horses, it seems like most have 3 to 5 horses, but some are smarter than that and just have 1 or 2. So, and I would be in the more than 5 horses category. So I'm in Horseaholics Anonymous, I guess. Okay, so I'm going to be doing 2 presentations today, and the first one's on simple and sustainable solutions for managing horse properties. I'll bring up my screen right here. So Terry, it's telling me it doesn't want to let me share. It says, well, let me see if I can change it. Because it's asking me, it says who can share, and I changed it to only host. But it still isn't letting me do anything. Ah, there it goes.
Okay.
All right. So hopefully everybody can see that. And maybe we can take the poll down now, I guess, Terry.
I thought I took it down. Is it still on there?
Well, I just took it off. I just closed it on my screen.
Okay.
All right, here we go. Okay, so what I'm going to do is a little bit of a introduction to myself and my program, because it's different than anything else I've ever come across. And so I just want to give you some information on that. I like to do that for number of reasons, just so you know my credentials, but also because it might give other people an idea to do similar sort of work, and we need lots of people out here spreading the good word. And I also like to do it because there might be youth who might be interested in doing this kind of work someday, and to give you ideas for businesses and things that you can do with your land and your horse property as well. So my my undergraduate degree is in psychology and biology. And then I have a graduate degree in media production and journalism and communications. But my career has been about 30 years working with horse keeping and land management education. And I work primarily with natural resource agencies, contracting with them to develop educational materials for their horse owner audience, teaching horse and livestock owners how to conserve natural resources. So a little bit more about my horsey background. So I've been a horse person my whole life, and my husband and I are both horse people. He's a trainer and a judge, and we compete in reining and ranch riding, and I primarily compete in ranch riding the last 5 or 6 years. And we're also real involved with Mustangs. In fact, Matt is at the BLM Mustang Wild Horse Corral today in Boise with a client, helping her pick out a Mustang. So our place, we live in Nampa, Idaho, which is in southwestern Idaho. It's part of the Great Basin area, so it's the desert. And I just want to give you some information about your place in case we can be a resource, but also in case it might provide some ideas for you for managing your property. So we manage Sweet Pepper Ranch as a business, but being environmentally sensitive and catering to the public with that as our primary directive is our goal. So it's often referred to as ecotourism or agritourism. So we have a horse motel for travelers and for short-term boarding. We also board horses along with ours, but in the summer months and the warmer months, it's a big part of our business. And we promote our horse property and our horse motel and all aspects of our business with mud, manure, and pasture management in mind. We say that we are eco-friendly. We also have a bed and breakfast, which hasn't been operating for a year because of the pandemic, but we do have a really cool glamping tent, and we're so glad we do. That's it on the bottom, because it's been super popular during the pandemic, like almost booked solid during the warmer months. And so it's a great place that people can stay and still be distanced and have their own space. At Sweet Pepper Ranch, we do boarding, training, the horse motel, as well as Matt does lessons and retreats. And boy, we hope that by the end of the summer, we'll be able to go back to offering our cowgirl retreats, which are about ranch riding, the discipline of ranch riding, as well as we do yoga, meditation, gourmet food, and education and lectures. So Horses for Clean Water is my business, and I've been doing it for close to 30 years. And we offer classes and farm tours and workshops. We develop educational materials. I do lots of individual consultations, and it's all on ways that horse owners can conserve our natural resources. So the clean water part is often a question or things that something that the audience wonders about. And what that refers to is the fact that runoff from a muddy horse property or from an overgrazed pasture or from mismanaged manure piles can cause problems. And it can cause problems for everything from horse health and chore efficiency to owner convenience and to environmental problems. Because if the runoff from these properties gets into the surface water, it can contaminate surface water and cause huge issues that way. So problems, the clean water part refers to the fact that problems from mud and runoff can cause horse health issues. It can decrease our convenience and chore efficiency for running our place. It reduces the productivity of our property. It causes more vet bills, potentially from parasites and pathogens and insects that might live and breed in the mud or in the manure. It reduces the aesthetics for our neighborhood and our property value as well. And then it impacts the bigger ecosystem around us. And the water part is that it could be surface water, such as creeks, ponds, wetlands, or drainage irrigation ditches. And it can impact the aquatic life or riparian life in those areas. But it can also get into our groundwater. Like a mismanaged manure pile, the leachate can leach into the ground and can potentially contaminate groundwater. And many of us live in rural places, and groundwater is a concern for us. So the topics that I teach about are mud management. These are just some of them. Manure management, pasture management, chemical use reduction. And we'll be touching on all of these in the first lecture of mine today. Water conservation, that's an important one for us with climate change looming. I teach about climate change, and we'll touch on that today with some options for horse people, how we can reduce our, how we can help to reduce climate change a little bit. I teach about fire-wise education for horse owners, specifically for horse owners. I got funding from the BLM a number of years ago to develop education for that. So Horses for Clean Water, I hope that little bit of introduction gives you an idea of what Horses for Clean Water is, and that it's a way of caring for our horses and our land that's going to be a win-win-win approach to managing horse keeping. So it's good for horse health, good for chore efficiency, good for the productivity of our property, good for the aesthetics. It's hopefully going to save you money, and it's going to be good for environmental health as well. So let's jump into today's first talk, which is simple solutions for managing horse properties. And we're going to look at some common problems that you have on horse properties, and we're going to try to find a way to manage those problems that has the least negative impact on the environment. So when we have horse properties, a lot of times we end up with challenges. And sometimes it's based on perhaps maybe not having the most appropriate property for horse properties, like maybe in particular, this piece of property was at the bottom of a hill, so all the water from the top of the hill was running downhill. And they didn't have a confinement area. The horses were on the property 24/7, so they overgrazed it and all the accumulated water turned everything into mud and weeds. And then pretty soon it was all weeds, insects, problem insects. And, as humans in this world, especially since World War II, we've been kind of talked into turning to a chemical approach right away. And what seems to happen is the more chemicals that we use, oops, I didn't mean to advance yet. The more chemicals we use, the more dependent we become on that approach to managing the land. And the problem with that is, as most of you probably know, chemicals and plastics are working their way into our ecosystem. Basically, they're in our water, there's our surface water, they're in the air that we breathe, they're in the soil that we grow our crops in. And this is going to end up affecting us and all of those that we care about and love for generations to come. So in this talk today, what I'm offering up is some sustainable solutions for managing some of the challenges that we all face on horse properties. I'm going to suggest some safe choices for us, for our horses, our property, our neighborhood, and the natural world around us. So I've got 7 things that we're going to talk about. There's many, and I had to narrow it down. But we're going to talk about ways to put plants to work for you. They're just like great ideas, and there's no end to how much help plants can be on horse properties. We'll talk about insect, rodent, and weed control and odor control. I'll give you some water conservation tips. And then my last one is on tips for reducing climate change. And yes, us horse owners can actually be a piece of the puzzle for unraveling that big looming problem. All right, and just as a reminder, Terry said in the beginning about questions, please use that Q&A box to write down your questions. And when we get to the end of my presentations, then Terry's going to go through them and we'll try to get them all answered. But I want to be sure to meet your needs in this class. And 1 hour is quick, so this goes by quickly, and I know there'll be a lot of things that you guys might be thinking about. So my first point of the 7 points that we're going to talk about is putting native plants to work on your property. So a native plant, if you're not familiar with that term, that's one that lives in your area naturally and has not been introduced. And this is a picture from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and a section that's there on native plants, listing some of the native plants. And I'm going to go through and talk about native plants, but what I want to mention in the beginning is that you need to become familiar with the plants around you as far as toxicity for horses, and research that out. So many species of plants are poisonous to horses, like these are not native ones, but black walnut, yew, red maple, black locust, rhododendron, laurel, oak, parts of oak trees, and most fruit trees, interestingly enough. But the ASPCA has a great list of plants that are toxic and then also not toxic to horses. And then you should also consult your veterinarian. They might be able to help you with that. Okay, so native plants have lots of benefits to us over non-natives. In each part of the country, those native plants are going to be adapted to your climate, and they're going to require less care and less watering. They're not going to need any pesticides because they are naturally disease resistant and pest resistant because they've grown up there for thousands of years. So they've developed immunities to those to diseases and pests in your area. So they're going to cost less because it doesn't take as much effort to grow them and raise them. They're very attractive. That picture there is mostly native plants for California. And then a key thing about native plants, besides the fact that they cost less and they're easy to care for, is that they provide a lot of shelter for a variety of native insects and animals. And these insects and animals are key to the health of your ecosystem where you live. Okay, now comes the cool part. So it's just amazing, but there's a whole lot of jobs around a horse property that plants can do. And my pictures are going to be from all over the country and even from other countries, but that's just to give you an idea of what native plants are doing in different places. So this is a hedgerow at our former property in Western Washington. And that property had, when we moved in, it had a lot of lawn, like probably 2 acres. And we would spend, just hours mowing that lawn. And, it's fossil fuel and a waste of time. And along the driveway, we eventually turned it into a hedgerow. I'll mention hedgerows later on in this little segment right here, but hedgerows are a great place for native insects and small animals. It provides shelter and food for them. And, once you have a hedgerow in place, it's, low maintenance. You don't have to do anything then, and you just get to enjoy the scenery. And I might mention that so what we planted there primarily was woods roses, and they're a native rose, as well as you can see foxglove, and there were other plants as well. But when we sold that property, the new owners, I was complimented by the name that they chose for the place, and it was Wild Rose Ranch, which kind of gave me goosebumps. It made me feel like they were going to take care of the ecosystem, and they recognized the values of the native plants. So here's some of the jobs that plants, native or non-native, can do for you. They can do mud reduction, erosion control, dust barriers. They can provide visual screens and buffers. They can do summer shade or winter sun. So the shade, and they can do that for animals or people or buildings. So the shade is when you have deciduous trees and they have leaves. And then the winter sun is when those deciduous trees fall or leaves fall off, and you've got more sunlight on your buildings and your horses. If you choose, you can choose your plants and plant them so that it encourages that wildlife that you want. Like if you want beneficial birds to eat insects, or to eat rodents, or to entertain you or serenade you. And then plus all of this is low cost and virtually low care. I have 2 screens going here, which is why I keep pausing and looking away. So let's look at some of those points that I just mentioned of how native plants can work for you. And start out with this thought in mind. So a mature evergreen can drink up to about 250 gallons of water per day in the summertime. In the wintertime, the benefit of an evergreen is that it doesn't go dormant, and it keeps utilizing water year round. And deciduous trees are wonderful as well, but they go dormant in the wintertime. It depends on the species and where you live in California, but they may not be dormant for very long in parts of your country. So here is an example of native plants working as a mud manager. So this is a swale, a native plant swale for biofiltration and mud management on a horse property. So there are two long paddocks that go back towards, I think you can maybe see my mouse. So here is the long confinement area, and it goes back to her indoor arena. She uses her indoor arena kind of like a shelter, and she has it sectioned off so that each horse has part of the indoor arena. And then between each paddock, she's got this swale, and she planted native trees and shrubs in it that she got from a conservation district. And so a swale, if you're not familiar with it, it's like a ditch, a gentle ditch. And what that swale does then, it catches the muddy runoff that comes off of the confinement area and goes into there. And then plants need nutrients and they need water. So they're getting both from the runoff of this confinement area. And then, you know, it's reducing mud and it's providing habitat. Okay. Here's another example of using plants and how we used them at our horse property. So this is going to be just with grass and non-native grass, just like grass that you'd have on your lawn grass. So this is our horse property in southwestern Idaho. And the white building is what we call our main barn. This red one is what we call our guest barn, and we built that, and it's pretty flat. But what I didn't realize is, well, I mean, there is still a slight slope that goes from here. I mean, the guest barn is upslope from the main barn. And when we bought the place and moved in, the previous landowner had used soil sterilants. So there was no plants growing anywhere except for where he had planted some trees. So the first winter looked like the pictures at the bottom. And actually the pictures at the bottom were good pictures. I didn't take pictures of it when it was really bad because I was so scared that maybe I'd met my match and I couldn't unravel this problem. It was super bad. All the water ran from uphill at the guest barn down into the main barn and just flooded the main barn. So what we did, just using lawn and compost, the previous owners had horses and they had just piled up the manure and hadn't used it for anything, but that was to our advantage because we had a huge pile of compost at our disposal to use. And what we did was we put in a swale, a gradual swale, and made it sort of snake around from the guest barn to the main barn. And then we took all that compost and we did it in the first spring, right about this time of the year. And we spread it out using our tractor and by hand. And then we seeded it by hand. And voila, we had lawn. And just having that little swale and the lawn, and we planted those aspen trees as well. And having that amount of vegetation was enough to stop that hellacious mud problem in the winter, because the grass plants slow the water down and allow the plants to absorb it back and let it soak back into the ground. So just having the plants there physically makes a huge difference as far as mud management. Okay, let's look at the other side of our property and what we did there for mud management. So once again, let's see. So we're going to be looking right there. And we're going to be talking about this shelter belt that we put in of trees. And prior to moving in, that's what it looked like. There was nothing there, and when we moved in, that's what it looked like. And we went through that first winter and we ended up with the picture on the lower right, and you can see how super muddy it was. It was just an unbelievable nightmare. And again, I didn't even take the worst pictures. I was so afraid I had met my match. But what we did was we went in and we pulled the fencing down from the top of the hill to the bottom of that little slope right here. And this is the same here. We pulled the fencing to the bottom, and these are the trees that we went in and planted. This is really just the first year. Actually, it is just the first year. I bought bigger trees because I wanted something to happen right away. So we used a selection of native and non-native trees. And so then they act as mud management, and they slow water down that was running off that slope there. They also provide habitat again for insects and animals. And then they act as a visual screen between us and our neighbors, as well as a wind buffer and shade in the summertime. So let me go back and you can compare those differences. I don't think I have. Oh yeah, I do. We'll keep going forward. So here's what it looks like a few years later. Big, huge difference. It's just amazing what plants can do for you. And then here's a comparison. So that's before and after. And you can just see the huge benefit aesthetically all the way to mud management and environmental. So hopefully that resonates with you guys. So plants can provide summer shade and winter sun for our horses, as well as for our buildings. They can provide a dust barrier. This was at our old place in Western Washington, and that was our arena. And in Washington, it looks like you're isolated, but it's primarily because the vegetation is so dense. And in this picture here, we had our neighbor's beautiful home that was probably, maybe 50, maybe 100 feet from the edge of our arena. And we went in and planted, the big trees were there, but everything else, it's crazy to think of. We planted everything else from small trees, and it provided a wonderful privacy barrier as well as a dust barrier. Here's another example from our previous property. On the other side of the property, down slope, again, our neighbor's house was probably 20 feet from our property line. And we figured they didn't want to be looking out their dining room window right at our horse paddocks. So we put in evergreens, and we have, there's native shrubs in there too, which in the wintertime they weren't blooming, but you could still see what a good benefit the evergreens provide. And here's a fun idea for plants, and native plants in particular, is having a trail course. I teach a whole class on this, and an online class too, on how you can take native plants and weave them into a small scale trail course. And they act as mud managers, and they provide nice aesthetics. This is a property they had just finished. I conducted a farm tour on it, and they took a 1 acre square piece at the top of their property. They were on a hill, and they turned that into a small scale mountain trail course, and put in lots of kind of like retention areas with compost and native plants, so that it reduced the amount of water that ran down onto the rest of their property. So it's an environmental benefit as well. Here's some landscaping ideas with native plants. This is our place in Nampa, which again is the desert. So there's fire hazards here, as well as, water conservation issues. And that's about when we, shortly after when we moved in. And this is this is all of the native plants that we've planted. And I haven't watered the native plants that you see here in about 7 years, not even once. And we get 7 to 10 inches of rain. So this is the irrigation ditch in our property. We treat it like it's a waterway. And that's before this, when we moved in, there was nothing on it because the previous landowner had used herbicides and soil sterilants. So that's probably like the first or second spring. And then this is after we did some restoration work with native plants. And again, we don't water it, the native plants at all. They're on their own and they're happy. We also have a pollinator hedgerow. I am a huge fan of these, and I encourage you guys to work with your resource agencies to look into this. So pollinator hedgerows are super fun. And what they are is habitat for beneficial native pollinating insects. And they're really pretty. They're low maintenance, and it just makes you feel good that you're doing something for beneficial insects. So when you have native trees and shrubs and plants in general on your property, you need to do what you can to protect them. And this is an example of what not to do. Chicken wire, fencing something right against the tree isn't going to keep the horse from compacting the roots and chewing on the roots, and it really doesn't stop the horse from chewing on the trunk of the tree as well. And that's going to kill the tree, and as it does, then your place is going to get more wet. So what would be better is if you instead, in this situation, fenced that whole clump of trees so that the horses couldn't get in there, doing something more like this. Then you can see the individual trees are all fenced off, either with hot tape or with permanent fencing. Okay, let's go to our second sustainable simple solution, and that is about insect control. And we got lots of good ideas for insect control, starting here with some fly control ideas. So fly masks are your #1 mechanical control for keeping flies out of your horse's eyes. And then fly predators. And if you're not familiar with fly predators, they're very commonly used in California. In fact, it's a BMP for dairies to use fly predators. And BMPs is a prescribed practice that stands for best management practice, and it's prescribed by the different natural resource agencies as a way to manage flies. So fly predators are stingless nocturnal wasps that are the size of a gnat. So you have no idea that they're there. There's going to be some that are native that are there, but it's not going to be enough to deal with a problem fly population. So you order these through different companies, like Arbico is one. You can just Google fly predators on the internet and you can find different sources. They come in the mail. They look like this lower right-hand picture. You sprinkle them out in the hot spots where your horses urinate and defecate. They hatch at night, then they go and lay their eggs in the larva of flies, and then that kills the flies. So it's a biological control for flies. And here is another non-chemical option for managing flies and insects. Insect-eating birds and animals are part of a sustainable approach. And swallows, there's swallows all over the United States and North America, and different kinds. and they're going to offer us control of soft-bodied flying insects. So that's primarily flies for us horse owners. And each bird is going to eat several thousand insects a day. So if you have a nest box, that means you're going to have at least 2 birds and then the babies. And sometimes you have an aunt or an uncle too. So it's just tremendous fly control when you've got swallow boxes. So the way to find out, so swallows are secondary cavity dwellers. That's a really important word to use or to know about and to understand. So what that means is that they need a cavity, they need a hole to live in, and they can't make it themselves. They need a cavity that somebody else has made, like in a rotten tree or from a woodpecker, a flicker, if they've created the hole. So birds that are secondary cavity dwellers respond really well to nest boxes. So this is a nest box that's specific for violet green swallows. So what you can do is find out what swallows are in your area, and find out what nest boxes you need for them. And you can do that by seeing if your extension office can help you, or you can, you can go to a wild bird store. They're wonderful resources and sell nest boxes there. Or you can go online, and I don't think I have a picture of the book, but Audubon has a great book on how to build these nest boxes and different considerations for hanging them. So these are swallow boxes as well. These are for tree swallows. And these are barn swallows, and most places have barn swallows. A lot of people want to complain about them because the other swallows aren't very messy, and these guys can be a little messy. But I am here to advocate for the little barnies, that they do a great deal of good for us. And if you can tolerate a little bit of droppings by putting a newspaper on the ground or a ledge underneath their nest to catch the droppings, they're going to do a tremendous amount of work for you in controlling insects. That you don't have to pay for it, doesn't hurt you in any way, like chemicals would. So they're working for you. Other insect-eating birds to consider are purple martins on the left and bluebirds on the right. There's mountain bluebirds and other species of bluebirds that are good insect eaters, and bluebirds their numbers tend to be dropping. So their different conservation agencies or organizations are always encouraging horse owners, in particular horse owners, to put up bluebird boxes. We're kind of the last best hope for reestablishing a viable bluebird population. Bats are another option. They are going to get your nocturnal insects like mosquitoes. So another non-insecticidal option is using traps that don't have chemicals in them. So I'm a big advocate of fly tape. It's just crazy how well it works. It's like crazy. And as you can probably imagine, it costs hardly anything. But what you want to do is put up a lot of tape, and you'll probably have to put up new tape once a week during the worst of the seasons. That, sometimes we have 30 to 60 strands of fly tape in the barn, and you can like immediately see the benefit of it. There's something fulfilling about that. And fly bags, they work super well. They're stinky, but if you read the manufacturer's directions, they say put them on the perimeter of your property, because the bad smell is what lures the flies in. And so you want to lure them away from your barn and your high traffic areas. And then, of course, the best insect control is going to be mud and manure management. We'll talk about manure management in the second talk, and I've got a lot of resource information if mud is something that you'd like to learn more about. And then I always like to encourage people to remember that not all bugs are bad. It's something like less than 0.5% of all bugs are problem bugs. And for example, this is a praying mantis, which eats a lot of problem insects. So most bugs are going to be good and are there to help us. Okay, my third point is rodent control. And I think I need to keep moving along here because I think I need to be done about 10:35. So I'm going to keep going here. So rodent control, there's lots of a couple of cool ideas for non-chemical control of rodents. Your first line of defense is going to be to keep your place clean and picked up as much as possible. I know it's sometimes easier to say than do, but keep all of your grain and cat food, dog food in rodent-proof containers. That's like something metal. And then don't leave things laying around that they could nest in, like feed bags or blankets on the floor or towels. And then what you might want to think about is hiring a barn owl. And it's much easier than it sounds. In fact, my very first barn owl box on a horse property was actually in the Bay Area on a horse property when I was hired in the late 90s to work on a big project down there providing education. And we went to a horse property and they had a barn owl box, and I had never thought of that. And I thought it was just so cool. So barn owls eat rodents, and they need open spaces. They need like pasture land, not bare ground. They need pasture with good cover, because a rodent isn't going to live on the bare ground as much as they're going to live in rough pasture. Really, what's best is if you think of how cow pastures often look. They call them rough pastures, ones that have clumps of grass in them. But if you have meadows nearby, any kind of open spaces with grass, you're going to have rodents. And if you have horse property, you're going to have rodents. And a family of barn owls will eat something like 2,000 rodents in a couple of months. So this is a barn owl box here. Where we live, the county puts them up, which is absolutely amazing, because this part of the world is not known for being environmentally conscious, I guess. But they put them up because they realize the value in rodent control with barn owls. And then they have a contract with Boise State University, and they provide maintenance of them and do studies. And this is a picture of one of the BSU grad students and banding one of the barn owls in our box. And it is awesome having barn owls on your property, and so fun hearing them at night and seeing them at dusk. So you can also have kestrel boxes. Kestrels are raptors. They're small raptors, about the size, a little bit bigger than a robin, or about the size of a robin, and they will eat large insects like grasshoppers all the way up to mice. And they, like barn owls, are secondary cavity dwellers and respond really well to nest boxes. And you can also get these at the wild bird stores, or you can go online and get that Audubon book I was mentioning and build them that way. Okay, my fourth point is weed control. and ways to look at managing weeds so that you have the least toxic approach to managing weeds. And the first and best way is to have good pasture management so that you don't ever overgraze, so that you do rotational grazing, that you keep horses off of pastures when the grass is dormant or when the soils are soggy. But it includes hand removing weeds if your population of weeds is not too bad. If you can, you want to hand remove them, that would be great. Weed burners, integrated pest management, vinegar spray, and appropriate use of herbicides. I'll show you all of that. So these are weed burners. And obviously when you live in an area prone to wildfire like we do here and you do there in California, you want to be very careful with this. And probably the only areas that you want to use this on would be like gravel driveways and parking areas and confinement areas that don't have grass in them. But these work really well as a least toxic approach. There are also insects that can be beneficial insects and can eat some of your problem plants. Like this is the caterpillar for the tansy, that eats tansy ragwort, and it's the Cinnabar moth's caterpillar. And you can buy these integrated pest management solutions online. Vinegar sprays. So vinegar is acetic acid, and it is what's called a non-selective herbicide. That means it's going to, it acts as a non-selective herbicide and it'll kill everything that it's sprayed on. But, at least you're using vinegar and not a chemical that's going to last for a long time in the environment. And then if you are going to use an herbicide, what we recommend in the natural resource industry is that if possible, get help to identify the appropriate herbicide for your specific weed. Mix according to instructions, spot spray, and then don't spray when it's windy or it's going to rain, because otherwise it would go to waste. A few odor control ideas real quickly. So many of us horse properties are in areas where we've got neighbors around us. And even though we pick up the manure, we can't always pick up the urine, and we can have a real problem with odor smells, which is something that I worry about, having neighbors complain then. And so one thing you can do is create what I call a horse urinal. It's the, pee spot where they pee. And what you can do is dig it out and put in some kind of wood product there. So this is pelleted bedding. And this one is cedar chips. And the horses in these cases tend to just pee in those same spots. And then you just clean it like a stall, maybe once a week or so. The lower right-hand side, they change those cedar chips out once a year. Their ground is very hard. It doesn't get muddy. The system works quite well for them. And the one on the left, she cleans it like once a week. Other odor control ideas: if you drag or harrow, if you can get in with equipment into your paddocks, breaking it up will, it's basically anaerobic bacteria that you're smelling, and that will help break it up and add air into it. And so the aerobic bacteria can help break it down. There's zeolite products like the lower left-hand side. So these are a clay-like mineral that helps absorb the ammonia in urine, and you can sprinkle those out into your paddock. And then there's also beneficial sprays like the one on the right here, EM1. It's a inoculant basically that has beneficial microbes in it, so bacteria and fungus, and it helps break down the odor causing material. Okay, water conservation tips. real quickly, different ways that you can conserve water on horse property is really important for most of the world these days. So instead of dumping stock tanks like in this picture, that's going to create more mud and erode away your footing and waste water, we'll talk about automatic waters, roof runoff uses, pervious surfaces, and outdoor wash racks. So I'm a big fan of automatic waters. There's so many kinds these days, but they conserve water for you. They keep the water cool so that you're not going to get as, and keep it circulated so that, and you're not going to get mosquitoes in it or as much of an algae problem. Or when you do clean it, you're just dumping out a small pan of like 5 gallons of water versus 50 or 100. Roof runoff uses, you may be able to capture the rainwater off of your roof and utilize that. If you do this, you want to make sure that there's, first of all, no sharp edges that the horses can get cut on. And you also want to make sure that you have an overflow valve, like right here with a hose, that goes someplace where it's not going to create more mud. Here's rain barrels on the left and cisterns on the right for collecting the roof runoff and reusing it. And this is from my trip in Australia, where they have severe water shortages and there was not a roof anywhere really that didn't capture the roof runoff and reuse it. This was a big horse facility, and that was the cistern that they had. And then every place I went, they actually charged for people to use the wash rack to wash their horses. And it cost more for hot water. Recharging the groundwater with pervious surfaces is another conservation feature. Here's a pervious surface in a horse property in the high traffic area. The human high traffic area of a horse property. Outdoor wash racks are another way to recharge the groundwater. All right, my last tip, I'm going a little quickly because I know I'm kind of out of time. My last tip.
You have fudge time, Alayne.
Pardon me?
You have a little fudge time, so.
Fudge time,
worry.
okay,
Yeah.
good. I remember you saying that, so I was hoping that was the case. My last tip is a fun one, as fun as climate change could be, but it's one that I'm really eager to share with you guys because I believe there's going to be people in the audience here that will be able to take these ideas and run with them. And I wanted to start this little section with the quote from Margaret Mead that I'm sure you've all heard before, that never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. So all of the climate change models that we have right now predict that, as you guys know, that our planet is getting hotter, and it's going to be increasingly difficult for many species of plants, animals, and insects to live in it along with humans. And we're expecting hotter, drier summers, warmer winters, more rain and less snow, longer and more frequent droughts, more weather extremes. So here's what I say. Let's go to the next slide. I say that horse owners can make a difference in pasture management, and here's how. So here's my thoughts on it, and this is totally my thoughts. It's not anything I've gotten from anybody else. We have in the United States right now, we have about 1 billion horse owners and 7 million horses. So if half of those horses were kept on 1 acre of well-managed green grassy pasture, that would be about 3.5 million acres of carbon sequestration going on that we maybe don't already have. And that's about the equivalent of the size of the state of Connecticut. So good horse pasture management, I think, is one of the things that we can do for ourselves and our horses, but also for reducing climate change. So good pasture management includes rotational grazing. As I'm showing in this picture here, it's avoiding bare spots and overgrazed pastures. And that's important because dark ground absorbs more sunlight more than lighter areas. So dark ground is hotter and drier, and it kind of creates that spiral the wrong direction. Whereas good pasture cover keeps the ground cool, helps the soil retain moisture. It helps keep the pasture plants photosynthesizing and sequestering that carbon. So the good pasture management techniques we want to do are using a confinement area, never grazing below 3 to 4 inches so that your grass plant has enough energy to keep being a grass plant and being healthy, rotational grazing, and then keeping horses off of dormant winter pastures or soggy soils from storms. So here is a confinement area. And we use that to keep our pastures from getting grazed below 3 to 4 inches. It's where we put our horses so that they don't get fat. It's where we put our horses when it's wet, maybe if you're irrigating or if there's been a storm, or it's where you put them in the winter time if your pastures are dormant and aren't growing. So we never want to graze below 3 to 4 inches. The plant needs to have 3 to 4 inches. That belongs to the plant. Otherwise, their roots are going to start reabsorbing and they're going to become unhealthy, and you're going to have bare spots with weeds and less carbon sequestration going on. So get to know a ruler and know what 3 to 4 inches is, and know what 6 to 9 inches is. 6 to 9 inches is when you can put your horses back on pasture. 3 to 4 inches is when you can take them off. And this goes for any kind of livestock, by the way. And you'll get a lot more productivity off of your pasture, and you'll be able to avoid bare spots and overgrazing if you implement a rotational grazing system, which we can talk about in more detail in other classes, but you can look for information on rotational grazing either through me or online. Keeping your horses off the pasture when it's soggy from irrigation or from winter storms is a big part to avoid compaction. And once it's compacted, then the roots can't, the pasture plant can't grow through the soil anymore. Using compost is all part of this. And we're going to be talking about that in detail in our second talk. Composting manure and organic waste and putting it back on your pasture is going to help hold moisture. It's going to help the soil hold moisture, and the plants will get more nutrients. And so that's going to help improve that pasture and keep it sequestering carbon. Plants and soils benefit from those nutrients and organics. Big thing I'm going to talk about is how much we benefit because of the $300 a year in compost that it saves us. So adding compost to your pastures helps soil hold moisture, creates a natural nutrient cycle, and benefits your pasture plants. Okay, we made it through to the end. So my point is in this talk is that, and I hope you could see it, is that, we all have choices in our everyday lives, and sometimes we think they're just our choices and maybe nobody will notice, and that they don't make a big deal or a big difference. But, you know, the kind of car we drive and mowing our lawn and what kinds of products we put on our pastures and our lawns and our yard, and all these things, and how we manage our horse and whether we have mud and flies, all these things make a big difference. And they do add up because each one of our little pieces of property are all part of one big watershed. And all the different impacts in that watershed all add up and all count and they can all affect the other people in that watershed. And then the amazing thing is that all of our watersheds, they're all part of one great big huge watershed that we all call home. And it does make a difference, like Margaret Mead said in the beginning of this last little part, you know, all of our choices can make a big, huge difference. So don't forget to smell the roses along the way. And I'd love it if they were native roses like this one is. Or if you're my horse, Bob, you can taste the wild roses along the way. And here's some resources. I will mention them again at the end of my next talk, but I have online classes. I do consultations. I have an email newsletter that comes out regularly. I have a website that I hope is very user-friendly. I'm on Facebook and all the social media. I write for The Horse and thehorse.com, which is an excellent resource, and thehorse.com is free. And it has articles and videos and slideshows. And then Sweet Pepper Ranch, if you're ever in this area, we'd love to be a resource for you as well. And that's it, Terry. And I can take questions now, or however you want to do things.
Yeah, that's fine. I can.
Do you want me to stop sharing the screen or leave that up?
It's up to you. But I can read you. There have been a couple of questions from Marilyn.
Okay.
And if it's a back and forth thing, I'm happy to unmute her and she can speak directly as well. So her first question is, what is an alternative of manure piles that accumulate? Should they be put in trailer, kept in there, and then once a month or more, can you take manure to the dump? I really need to get an easy way to keep manure and so flies out of the property. But where do you take it?
Well, that's a great foreshadowing question that we will cover in the next talk
Great.
In just a few minutes.
Great. Let's see. So she has a second part to the question. So I guess she's has a lot of trouble with flies on her half-acre. So yeah, if you're going to be covering that in more detail, maybe we can add that one on. I'll keep a hold of that question so we can.
Okay.
Anyways, and then she's just saying on her second part is that the property is a total of 11 acres, but 7 is in vineyards.
Oh.
So yeah, so if you're going to be addressing that, maybe Marilyn would like to.
Well,
hang on.
As far as we'll be addressing manure management options, but insect control, I would say, you know, pretty much what we talked about today, and maybe her question came in before I had actually covered that. So
right, yeah. Let's see. Marilyn, did you want to add anything to your question there? I've just unmuted you if you'd like to say anything. Let's see. Okay, she might not be right there. Okay, well, we'll hopefully cover that in the next section then.
Okay.
And so, so now we have a choice of whether we can take just a quick break, or you want to go right on into your.
Why don't we just take a quick break and let everybody, you know, take a bio break if they need it.
Yeah.
And then we can jump into the next one. So at least they can step away from the screen for a minute. So
Alrighty.
what time do you want to restart at?
Well, maybe just in 5 minutes, like at
Okay.
10:55. We'll just
Okay.
take a few minutes. People can go use the facilities, whatever.
Sounds good.
Okay. We'll see you
I'll
all
stop.
here.
Yeah, I'll
Okay.
stop sharing the screen for a few minutes.
Okay, we'll see you all back in a few minutes. Okay, I hope everyone had a little chance to grab a snack or use the facilities. I think we'll start on back. So Alayne, I'll let you take it away again.
All right, let me go ahead and get my presentations up. I think I got to open it up here just a second. All right. Almost there. All right, back to share screen, and here we go. Okay. All right, that probably looks a lot better. Okay, we're going to be talking about options for manure management. Hopefully I can give you guys some good tips and things to think about going forward. So what we want to do in this part is look at ideas so that we end up thinking about manure as an asset and not a liability. And, you know, most of the time us horse owners are just always trying to figure out a way to deal with the manure, and what we want to do instead, and what I hope to offer you here is like a paradigm shift, so we can think of different ways to use manure as a resource. So in the pictures here, as you can imagine, that this top left-hand side is very much a liability for this property. First of all, there's no chore efficiency involved. It's very difficult to get in here with a vehicle, or if you're cleaning the 20 some odd stalls at this place. They've got this huge pile of manure that must smell bad and have runoff and flies and odors. So there's no part of this that's an asset. It's all a liability. Whereas the picture on the bottom is definitely an asset. So it's neat, it's clean, you can imagine that it's probably easy to pick up the manure on that place and get it into the 3 compost bins. The compost bins are right in the middle of the confinement area. And then when they're ready to spread the finished compost, the pastures are out on the perimeter of the sacrifice area, so they can unload the compost bins and take it right out to the pastures. So if we were there in person, I'd ask you guys to tell me if you know how many pounds of manure a horse produces in a day. And many times the favorite answer is a lot, but it's the USDA says a horse produces about 50 pounds of manure a day. And in 1 year, that's 8 tons. And I remember in the beginning that most people had 3 to 5 horses. So, you know, some of you are dealing with as much as 40 tons of manure a year. So that's the reality of the situation. Other kinds of livestock, in case you guys have other animals, They produce a lot of manure as well. And here's some of the numbers. Cattle, it's 60 pounds of manure a day. Dairy is 80 pounds of manure a day. That's why it's so problematic when we live near dairies. Pigs, for a 1,000-pound animal, it's about 63 pounds of manure a day. For 1,000 pounds of chickens, you get about 80 pounds of manure a day. So that's more than a horse by weight. So anyway, just as a way of thinking about it, it's part of what comes with the business is that, what we feed into the animal comes out the other end, and we need to address it. We can't just pretend like it's not there. And here's a case where they're trying to pretend like it wasn't there. So this manure pile was at a commercial facility, and they just kept stockpiling it, and they just had this huge Mount Rainier sized pile that I'm sure was a huge eyesore to the neighborhood and the neighbors, as well as environmental problems and flies and odors. And there's so many better things, that you could be doing with this land. Like you could have a parking area, you could have turnout, you could have an arena, an outdoor arena. There's many things better that you could be doing with that than creating a eyesore. And so when you have 50 pounds of manure per horse per day, if you don't pick it up, what it becomes is 50 pounds of mud. So manure is composed of fine organic material. It's the stuff that's good for pastures that helps with water conservation. But we don't want those mud sponges in our confinement areas because it's going to turn into this. So we've got to pick up that manure on a regular basis and get it out of there. Otherwise, it's going to be a chore efficiency issue, a horse health issue, because living in mud is not good for anybody. So we need to break that cycle with the manure for a couple of reasons. One is because of what I just mentioned on the bottom picture is when we don't pick up the manure, it just creates more mud. The fine organic material holds moisture, traps and holds moisture, and creates mud. And then as far as parasite problems, the way the cycle for worms works with horses and all mammals is that the adult parasite is in the intestines and the inside of the animal, and that's where it sheds its eggs, and the eggs pass out in the manure. And then once outside of the animal, they hatch. And some species of worms hatch as frequently as every 3 days. And then what you get is a microscopic larva, and it crawls around, and it's hardwired to crawl up on the tallest piece of grass around. And when it does that, particularly on wet, short grass, it's more likely, in manure contaminated pens, it's more likely that your horses are going to ingest those microscopic larvae and reinfect themselves and continue that parasite reinfestation cycle. So that's another reason why we want to have a manure management plan on horse properties. And then environmentally, when you don't have a manure management plan, you're just a huge liability to yourself and the community and the environment, because the leachate that comes from it is full of nutrients and nitrogen and bacteria, and all those things are good for compost and good for pastures, but they're bad for water quality and they're bad for groundwater. So the runoff from a mismanaged manure pile can cause problems for human health, as well as for aquatic life and for surface water as well. But the good news is that if you compost and reapply it to your pasture, you can create a natural nutrient cycle that's going to be beneficial. Let's see. There. We're going to create a holistic approach by composting and reapplying compost to our pastures, one that is going to be beneficial for the plants and the soil. It's going to create a healthier pasture. And then once you have a healthier pasture, like in this picture, then that's going to filter out nutrients and sediments and keep it from running off of your property. And then the big bonus to us is that one horse per year, that 8 tons of manure actually composts down to being about 300 or more dollars worth of compost. So creating a natural cycle and treating manure as a resource saves you money, is going to make your horse happier and healthier because you're creating better pasture. It's going to reduce flies and odors and parasites, and it's going to create a nicer place for you and your neighborhood to enjoy. So I'm going to talk about some manure management options, but they all start with these 2 important take-home points. These are what I'd call your take-home points. And the first one is that you've got to pick up the manure on a regular basis. So I recommend picking it up at least every 3 days. And that helps to break the parasite reinfestation cycle for some species. Realistically, picking it up at least once a day is better, because the more horses walk through the manure, the more it churns it into your topsoil and into your footing, and the more it creates a mess. But if you can pick it up every day, that's even better, but at least every 3 days. And then you want to cover your manure piles, particularly during the rainy season, so that they don't get so wet that you have those nutrients that you're trying to save for your compost, so that those nutrients don't get washed out. All right, so I am going to talk to you now about 3 techniques or options for managing manure. I'm going to talk about how to compost and use it on site. I'm going to talk about what if you have too much manure and compost and you need other options. And then I'm going to talk about how to become more chore efficient with manure management. Okay, so let's jump into composting. I'm a big fan of composting, and that's because there's a lot of advantages to composting. Here's some of the advantages to composting for horse owners. So the composting process is going to kill worm eggs, parasites, pathogens, and weed seeds. It's going to kill most of them. So that's going to help you reduce your parasite reinfestation load with your horses. It's going to reduce flies and odors. It's going to reduce the volume of material that you have by about half. So if you have a 6-foot tall manure pile and you compost it, it's only going to be 3 feet tall. And that in itself is of value to you. It makes it easier for you to manage something that's only 3 feet tall. And then it provides you with a free, easy, and super valuable soil amendment that will improve your pastures. So the advantages in this slide, the advantages of composting for the environment, is that applying compost to soils improves the health of the soils, because there's micro and macronutrients in there. There's microbial life, like beneficial bacteria and fungal organisms. And all of those things are going to make the soil healthier. And the bacteria and the fungal organisms are going to change the nitrogen in the manure that's in your compost. It's going to change it so that it's going to be in a form that the plants can use right away, and a form that's not as easily washed off by rain or irrigation. So once you have compost, It acts as a time-released, slow-acting fertilizer that has value over many years with just one application. And it's going to help soil hold moisture better, make plants healthier, and make them more disease resistant. And this is not just anecdotal. This is academically researched and proven. So let's talk about how the compost process works. You want to think about compost like something growing in your garden, and something that grows in your garden needs air and water. And compost is the same way. So you want to, first of all, with water, you want to add water so it's as damp as a wrung out sponge. And what you want to do is think of your kitchen sponge. So a kitchen sponge, when you want to use it to wipe off a counter, you get it super wet, you wring it out, and then you wipe your counter, and it works really well. If you have it too wet, it's going to be dripping water all over the place. If it's dry, it's not going to do any good. So that wrung out sponge is what you want to be thinking about as far as keeping your compost damp. And then this is where the tarp comes into play, particularly in a dry, hot, sunny place like where we live, or where a lot of you live in California. So the tarp is going to help hold moisture in. So we don't use a tarp in the wintertime as much as they would in other parts of the world, because we need the rain at that point to get it wet. But we use the tarp all summer so that it doesn't get too dried out. But in places like Western Washington and Western Oregon, they're going to need to use a tarp in the wintertime, because otherwise it'd turn into a soggy mud sponge. So there's the tarp and how we use it in the summertime. So the next part to composting is that you want it to be aerobic, and that means you want it to have air. So the way you can add air is by turning it with a tractor, or you can use what's called passive aeration, which is what you see in that picture. And that's just putting pipes into the compost, like PVC pipes, like chimneys. You can even use like a tamping rod, like in the picture there, a tamping rod to wriggle a hole into it, and the hole will collapse after a while. But in the meantime, it's getting air into the center of the pile. Okay, so what you're aiming for is 130 degrees for 3 days. And that's basically all you need to kill worm eggs, parasites, pathogens, and most weed seeds. And if you manage the air and the water, you don't have to even work at it that hard, because compost happens. And if you do that, you're going to end up with some really nice quality compost. So once the temperature in your compost drops below 90 degrees, then your secondary composters move in, and these guys help to break it down more and make it a nicer product. The red worms are red wigglers. They're the ones that are used for fishing. So worm bins are using the red wigglers, and worm bins don't get hot. They just use the secondary composters, primarily the red wigglers, to break things down, and that's called vermiculture or vermicomposting, and it works really well. And it's the recommendation for food, because we don't want to put food into our compost pile because it may attract rodents. So food should go into the worm bin and not necessarily into the compost. But anything organic will compost. But what's recommended for us, for non-commercial composters, is only herbivore manure, no dog and cat manure, no pig manure, because pigs can share pathogens with us, and no food products. but you can do lawn clippings and yard waste in your horse manure composting. Okay, so finished compost is going to look dark in color. It's going to be evenly textured, crumbly. It's going to be 90 degrees or less. It shouldn't be hot. It's depending on how actively you manage the air and the water, and if you keep it damp, it's going to take between 3 and 6 months. So let me show you some examples of compost bin setups. So what you want to do is think about laying out your compost bins in composting situations so that it's chore efficient. That's the main thing to think about, because if it's not chore efficient and it's too much like work, we're only human, and our job of picking up manure every day is not going to get done. So in this situation, this compost bin was right outside the back door. This is our old place in Western Washington. And it was really easy to clean the stalls and the paddocks on either side, and then come out and dump down using gravity, dump down into the compost bin. You want to place your compost bin approximately 100 feet from any concerns, and that would be like the high water mark of a water body, the property boundary, and particularly your wellhead. That's a really important consideration. And there may be more ordinances in your area, particularly in California, or if you're in any kind of a housing area that has codes. So here's some different ideas and designs for bins. You don't have to have a bin. You can just have a pile. My mom used to call them a compost heap. So you can have that. It just depends on what's easiest for you and how much land you have, and what's going to look appropriate for your property. The one in the upper left, she used Ecology blocks. They're usually low cost. Sometimes you can get them even for free, but like 50 or 75 bucks. The hitch is that they each weigh like a ton, literally. They fit together with Tinker Toys or Legos, like Legos. And, they have a notch in them so that they not lock together and they can't get knocked over. But the hitches, because they weigh that much, you have to have specialized equipment to deliver it, and they just can't drive all over the place. They want to drive in and set them down. But they're really handy to have because you can push against them with a tractor, and there's not any, they're very useful. Bottom left, she built that with a little bit of space between the boards so that it provides some passive aeration. Bottom right is super chore efficient. She can clean her paddocks and just come out, dump into her compost bins. And then when it's finished, she can load into her manure spreader and just head out to the pasture, which is basically to the left of the picture. Here's some more designs. These are Ecology block and cement bins. 3 Ecology block designs, and the bottom right is a cement bin. That's the NRCS, built with NRCS specifications, the Natural Resources Conservation Service. So here's what we did at our place as a scenario for a possibility. So my mantra always is to make things chore efficient, because we're only human, and if things are too much like work, it's just not going to get done. So we have 10 acres, and we pick up the manure everywhere except for in the pasture every day. So, and when I say we, it's not me usually, it's kids that we have working for us. So we've got all along the backside here, we have confinement areas, paddocks here, round pen, paddocks on the main barn, a large confinement area, another track paddock confinement area, and then in our arenas. So I wanted to place the composting area central to all of that. And then I also wanted to consider, I want it to be easy to get it out on our pasture. And I wanted to consider getting it, if we wanted to give it away, that it would be easy access for people driving in our driveway as well. So here's where we built it, right in the middle, basically. So there's plenty of maneuverable room behind it, and people can still access it if we're giving it away. We can easily get it out on our pastures, and it's not too hard, chore efficient wise, to get it in here. So we poured cement. We built ours to NRCS specs as well for our property. And when we built it, because we knew we'd want to tarp it, we had them sink horseshoes at the top of it into the cement so that we'd have built-in handles to attach our tarps. So finished compost, you want to apply it to pastures, lawns, gardens, only during the growing season when the plants can utilize it, about 1/4 inch at a time, and no more than 2 to 3 inches per year in the same place. And so when I say 1/4 inch, there's no manure spreader that's going to spread it at 1/4 inch. That's just kind of like a guideline in your mind, how you want it to look. It's going to, realistically, it's going to look like the picture that we have here. So you can apply it to lawns and gardens. I think we mentioned about our last time about how we created lawn with it. And here's us spreading compost onto our pastures. There's many different kinds of manure spreaders, many different sizes. This one in the upper left-hand corner, well, both of these are ground-driven manure spreaders. And the one in the upper left-hand corner is small enough that you can pull it with a like a gator or a side-by-side or an ATV, that kind of thing. And the bottom one, you need to have some kind of four-wheel drive vehicle to pull it. Here's we just bought this one because the manure spreader we has a PTO, which is a power takeoff. And it's a little more work with a PTO because you have to hook and unhook and hook and unhook every time you stop to put manure in. And this way, we're going to be able to pull this one with a four-wheel drive vehicle that we've got, and then just load it with our tractor. So we're hoping, and it's a little bigger, so we're hoping that will work better for our system. And another idea is maybe there's a neighbor that might be able to help you, and then maybe you can help them. So this is one year a neighbor came over with his grandparents' manure spreader and tractor, and then we just loaded it and spread that way. And boy, it went so much faster. It was just crazy. We got it all spread in one evening, whereas normally it'd take weeks, just us doing it on our own with the PTO manure spreader we used to have. And another use for compost that I always like to mention is using it as bedding. And this is from academic research. You can actually look it up online, and I'm sure you'll be able to see my friend's PhD thesis about using compost for bedding. So the darker stuff is finished compost. She puts it on top. This scalp uses it, reuses her compost as bedding. She puts it on top of a thin layer of fresh shavings and then puts the compost down, and it's super absorbent that way. Okay, so the second option is, what if you have too much manure on your place? Then what are your offsite options? And I think there was a question in the beginning about that. So this would be an option if your stocking rate is higher than what your pastures can handle as far as finished compost, or if maybe composting just sounds like too much work, it doesn't sound like fun, or maybe you don't have pasture. So as a example of this, this is South Point Casino in Las Vegas that has 1,200 indoor stalls and 2 indoor heated arenas and 1 indoor practice arena. So they get a lot of horses and a lot of manure every day from that many horses. And what they've done is they've set up a composting operation, and they pick up the manure each day and take it to composting facilities. So let's look at some of those scaled down versions that might be applicable for us. So first of all, it's easier to rehome or give away compost or sell it. Compost rather than straight stall waste is just much more attractive. You can consider a sign on your property. It's going to be particularly useful if you live on a busy road, like in this picture. Again, I think it'd be better if it's compost instead of manure. It's just something about saying you're going to pick up some manure versus you're going to pick up some compost. That sounds better. And it's going to be more useful to the people too, because it's ready to use. If you have a sign, you want to think about it though, because you could potentially be getting people, any time of the night or day. And then consider ways to advertise it. And I think I have a picture of that. Yes. So I had a lot. We're right at the tipping point as far as how many horses we have and how much compost we can apply to our pastures. So for the last 3 years, I've been wanting to give it away. And I've been trying to get an ad on Facebook Marketplace, and I keep getting kicked off because they say it's illicit or illegal activity. And I finally think I cracked the code this year, and I'm excited to tell you about it. Apparently it was using the word horse, composted horse manure. I think it was horse and maybe manure too, that they've got, in their search key phrases. You're not allowed to sell animals on Facebook Marketplace, which totally doesn't make sense, because if you look through it, you still see people selling bacon and sides of beef. But I'm not selling horses, I'm selling compost. But at any rate, I changed it this year, 3rd year, to just excellent quality compost. And then if you look over here in the description, it says equestrian facility. I just didn't even use the word horse. And I said high quality material, no chemicals, non-GMO feedstock. And holy cow, it was like a fire sale. We didn't sell it for much. We sold it for $10 a pickup load, and we loaded. But we've sold over $100 worth of compost, and we got it, rehomed it to a good use, and it's not, not causing a problem. So there's other ways, maybe master gardeners, Seattle tilth. Your tilth. There's tilth clubs all over the place, and they are about soil health. Seattle is the biggest one. But in your area, there'd be a tilth organization, gardening clubs, arboretums, next door, other social marketing options are a good idea, maybe Craigslist. So places that might accept stall waste, some of these places will take it for free, some might charge. That would be compost facilities, nurseries, plant nurseries, tree farms, crop farmers, gardeners, topsoil companies. I encourage you to create a relationship with these kinds of places to make this happen. And one thing I want to say, I guess, before we leave this screen, is sending manure and stall waste to the landfill is not a sustainable option, because landfills have a finite amount of space, and we don't want to take that space up with a renewable resource. So we don't want to waste it like that. We want it to go to a good use where it can be recycled and reused. So off-site options might require some special equipment. These are some of the options. Dumping trailers. Here's where he's created this little stand, and he pushes the manure cart up there and then dumps down into his manure spreader that he pulls with an ATV. These are for some bigger commercial horse properties where they have composting operations, topsoil places pick up their receptacles. Okay, and then my last point for manure management is all about chore efficiency. And the more chore efficient that you are, the easier it's going to be to manage that 50 pounds of manure per day per horse. So here are some ideas that we'll go over real quickly. So rubber stall mats, like in this picture here, if you've not used rubber stall mats, they are like the bee's knees. They are the gold standards in horse keeping because they have cushioning and they're level, but they're also really important for chore efficiency because then you can clean your stalls to only take out the manure and the urine saturated bedding. And then you can, the second chore efficiency idea is to bed so that you are using a really absorbent bedding that's going to absorb urine and moisture. So once you have a rubber stall mat, you don't necessarily need to have bedding across the whole stall. So many times we think of bedding as something that, like a bed, like what we'd like to sleep on. But bedding is really more like litter, like kitty litter or horse litter, and that is to absorb urine and moisture. So you may be able to just use the bedding in part of the stall as that litter. There's also alternative beddings that you might be able to find that are more absorbent and compost well. We'll talk about cleaning selectively and having useful equipment. Okay, stall mats, as I said, they are the gold standard in the industry, and stall mat installation is important so that you get them in so it's flat. There's different kinds of grips that you can use. You can use these, or you can even use vice grips. But you want to have crushed rock underneath. You want it to be level and compacted, and then you want to get those fit in there snugly and evenly. And then once you have them, you can use stall mats, and you may not even have to use bedding. We haven't used bedding in 15 or so years, unless we have a horse confined to a stall for an injury or something like that. Horses tend to urinate where the urine isn't going to splash because urine is slightly caustic. And so if you don't have bedding in your stall, they go out into their paddocks. So it just depends on where you want them to urinate. Let's see, let's keep going here. And pelleted bedding is probably the gold standard in bedding these days. The shavings are not as recommended because they're dusty and can cause respiratory issues for humans as well as horses. Whereas pelleted bedding is not as dusty, it's super absorbent, it composts super well, and it's also easy to manage because, like I show in this picture here, you can even store bags of pelleted bedding outside. Okay, the other part of chore efficiency is having the right equipment and the right tools for your tasks stored in a central area. There's so many different kinds of manure forks out there. Make sure you have ones that work and that are not missing tines, and have manure carts and things that are convenient and without flat tires. Here's a sample of different kinds of manure management equipment real quickly. This young lady here was 86, I believe, when I took that picture. And she had like 7 or 9 ponies that she cleaned their pens twice a day. She had 4-H kids that she worked with, and they did some amount of help, but The way she improvised so that she could manage it was that she had a garden cart and dish pans, and they would clean. She would clean into the dish pans, and then she could easily pick up those dish pans and dump them where she wanted into the compost bin. And she used dog manure pickup equipment to clean her pens. The manure cart on the upper right, we put a handle on it so it's easy to dump it over and pick it up. On the bottom left, it's really important when we trailer anywhere to either on a trail ride, to a trailhead, or to another horse facility, that we pick up all the manure and shavings and spent hay around our trailer, put it back into the trailer, and take it home to our composting system. And then this card on the bottom right, if you have, one horse or couple of minis. This is an Ursa, and it's super lightweight and maneuverable, and then the bed comes on hooked and it will dump. And this is for anybody who lives in a cold climate. We have to keep picking up manure in the winter time, and this picture was from outside of Anchorage, Alaska, and if they can pick up manure there, we can in the rest of North America as well. There may be a different kind of piece of equipment that you can use, like gators or like this Ranger, so you can clean your stalls and put it right into the Ranger, and then that can dump into the compost bin. That might be chore efficient and helpful. But the bottom line in chore efficiency is to clean your stalls so that you're only removing the manure and the urine saturated bedding, and you're leaving the clean bedding behind. And doing that is going to help reduce the amount of material that you have to deal with and the amount of manure management that you have on your place. And it's going to make it maybe not quite this small, but it's going to make it more manageable for you. So don't forget to do something wonderful with all that great compost and grow something for either for you or for your horses, like pasture. And doing that, you'll be creating a healthier, happier place for your horses and for you, and helping to sequester carbon and reduce climate change. And that is it. So I can leave the resources up here on the screen, and Terry, if there's questions, or if you want to go right into the other panel.
No, there are a couple of questions we could do before we get into the next panel. So Alex asks, for manure management of 2 horses on 3 acres, would you say a mule, ATV, or a tractor is more important? We don't have either and have been turning manure manually. So I know you mentioned the passive manure management, so maybe that might be a good option for her.
Yeah, I would say the most important piece of equipment is going to be a tractor, because there's so many more things that you can do with it. And you can some of the things that you do with a gator or a mule, you can still do with a tractor. But yeah, you don't have to have a tractor to turn your compost. You can use passive aeration with PVC pipes, or I've even seen people take corn stalks, tie them together and stick them into the compost. You just want to get air into the center of the pile, because that's where it's not going to permeate in on its own. So I would say save your money and go for the tractor, because that'll help with your pasture management as well, because you can use it for mowing or for dragging manure in the pasture.
Okay, great. And then Tiffany asks, do you have experience with Compostex fabric covers?
That might be the covers that they use at commercial places. I know that they're made out of Gore-Tex usually, so they're breathable, but they repel water. Um, it'd be great if that's what you wanted to get. That might be a good idea, actually, because the tarps are plastic, those blue and gray tarps, and they're terrible. They don't last. And then you end up with a whole bunch of plastic. And it used to be across the country before we lost our market in China, that we could recycle that kind of ag plastic, but we can't anymore. So what Matt and I have gone to doing is we use these cloth tarps that you can buy at the feed store here. They look like the kind of material that you used to get at the military stores. It's like they're like heavy oilcloth canvas, and they're breathable, but they kind of repel water. But if you wanted to spend the money and get a Gore-Tex cover, yeah, more power to you.
Okay, and then someone asks, do you muck the pasture? If so, how often? My pasture is 2 acres. I know you briefly covered this, but it might be worth addressing.
Yeah, pick up manure.
Yeah.
Pick up the manure in the pasture. No, what you want to do in your pasture is harrow it, because pastures, you can't really pick up the manure, because if the grass is long as it should be, you just can't get in there with a manure fork. So what you want to do is harrow the manure in the pasture, and harrowing is using some kind of a drag to break it up so that the plants can utilize the nutrients and the organics in the manures. But you do need to break it up somehow, either on your own with a manure fork or with a tractor and some kind of a drag.
Okay. So those were all the questions so far.
All right. I'll stop sharing the screen.
Okay.
And then you can tell me what you want me to do next, Terry, if each one of the speakers are going to go individually, so I'll just take myself off of video.
All right. And our next speaker is Carrie Wester. She is from the Sonoma Resource Conservation District. And so she's from a local resource conservation district, but no matter where you live around the country, you will have a resource conservation district for your area, and she'll talk more about that. So Carrie, if you're there, do you want to unmute yourself and start your video?
Yes, can you hear and see me?
Yeah, nice background.
Thank you. Well, great. I'm glad I got to listen in on some of the questions. So my name's Carrie Wester. I'm a project manager with our local Sonoma Resource Conservation District here in Sonoma County. First off, I just want to thank Daily Axe and Terry for inviting me to join today and talk a little bit about the RCD, what we do and what programs we have that may be of interest to some folks on the webinar today. I know that some people may not reside here in Sonoma County, so I'll touch a little bit about RCDs in general, and then I'll focus a little bit more on Sonoma RCD specifically. So for those who aren't familiar with resource conservation districts, Terry mentioned, they are prevalent throughout the United States. RCDs were established in the 1940s after the Dust Bowl, for obvious reasons, as a way of a more local kind of boots on the ground agency to work with landowners and help them protect natural resources. Currently in the state of California, there's 97 RCDs, and we each cover a different geographic area. So there's not overlap with RCDs. We have different specific geographical areas that we work in. Sonoma RCD works specifically in Sonoma County. We actually share Sonoma County with another RCD, Gold Ridge RCD, that is located out in the Great and Sebastopol area. So we work in different areas, but both within the county of Sonoma here. Let's see, RCDs work on local levels. with their own communities and are able to establish long-lasting relationships with their landowners and land managers. Sonoma RCD has been working here in Sonoma County since 1946, so we're really fortunate that we have been able to establish great programs and relationships with landowners over the time. A little note on funding. RCDs are kind of all over the board when it comes to different levels of funding. So certain RCDs may have more resources than others, depending on their specific areas and the funding in their particular counties. Our RCD here, we get a little bit of property tax revenue from landowners within the county, but we're mostly funded from competitive grants that we seek out based on what our natural resource needs are here in the area. The type of assistance that our CDs offer also varies depending on local needs and interests. Within Sonoma County, we have a big variety of different land uses that we work with. Types of projects that we work with or areas of programs include improving fish habitat, forestry for wildfire protection, water conservation, water quality protection, resilience to prolonged drought, and as well as climate change. I think you're also going to hear from our sister agency, the National Resource Conservation Service today, that also provides similar support, but on a federal level. So some assistance that I was kind of thinking of what folks, on today's call might be interested in. We have our regional conservation planning program, which we call our Land Smart program, where we assist landowners and land managers in identifying and prioritizing management practices according to your needs and goals and timelines. So this process kind of balances your goals, your management goals with practices that preserve and enhance natural resources. So several years ago, we developed, as part of that Land Smart program, we developed specific templates and materials for equine or confined animal facilities. Within that, we developed a template that essentially a landowner can fill out on their own. They can do it in combination with an RCD planner, or the RCD planner can kind of take the lead on developing a plan for a landowner. So a template covers a variety of topics. I'm sure covers a lot of things that Alayne has been talking about this morning. Anything from, managing your stormwater, managing your manure and your storage, nutrient management, pasture management, looking at your confined areas and drainage and management around those areas. So it comes up with potential management practices or potential projects that a landowner could implement in order to address those water quality concerns. Let's see, we have this template on, it's available online. It's in a PDF form as well as a Word document, in addition to some other equine specific resources we have on our website, which I'm happy to provide to Terry to provide to all the folks afterwards if interested. We do currently, if landowners are interested, we do currently have funding to cover plans about 85% of the cost. We do require a 15% landowner cost share for doing a plan. The current funding that we have to complete these plans, it technically ends this year. We're looking to get an extension, but we're not really sure. We just don't have confirmation that that is occurring yet. So I would say if landowners are located in Sonoma County and it's something that they're looking to do, that I would recommend getting in touch with me and having a conversation and at least getting on our radar for working with you to develop a plan. So that's kind of all I had that I was going to chat about. I think it felt like that was the most kind of informative thing that landowners are, might be interested that are on the webinar today, but I am happy to answer any questions if folks have any questions.
So nobody's written in any questions yet, Carrie. This is Terry, but I know that when people talk to me about the RCD or ask me questions about that agency, I think a lot of people have a hesitancy to contact their local resources because they think of them as regulatory agencies. And so I just was wondering if you could just touch on that a little bit about how the RCD is actually not a regulatory agency. It's a resource for the local communities they serve.
Yes, that's a great point, Terry. Thanks for bringing that up. And I probably should have mentioned that a little bit earlier. So RCDs are entirely non-regulatory. We were developed to really provide that assistance to landowners as almost like a person in between the landowner and the regulatory agency. We have very close relationships with our regulatory agencies in the area, and we work really closely kind of finding a balance if there is ever a concern on a property. But if if a landowner is interested in having a conversation or having us come out to a property, we are entirely, take it or leave it. There's no obligation to work with us. There's no obligation to implement any practices that we may recommend. It's just basically there to offer landowners that technical support.
So hang on here, I just got another question in. Does the Sonoma RCD provide nesting boxes for insect control?
You know what? Let me check on that. We did. We used to have some in storage, but I can definitely ask that question to our staff person to see if we have any more. And maybe Terry, I can follow up, provide you that information. Would that work?
That'd be
Okay.
fine. And just to let everyone know, I'm going to be providing a resource sheet to you after the conclusion of the webinar in the next few days, so I can include all that kind of information with that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think we've been asked that in a while, so I'm kind of curious as well. So thanks for asking.
Yeah. And let me just check and see if we have any more. No more questions so far.
Okay, I'll be on the call for a while, so if anyone speaks and they still have a question, I'll be available.
Great. Anyone is welcome to ask a question at any time using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So if you have any other questions for Carrie, feel free to continue to ask until the end of the webinar. Okay, and so with that, our next speaker is Brooke Pippy from the California Natural Resources Conservation Service, part of the USDA. So I'll let you take it away, Brooke.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you again so much, Terry and Daily Axe and Alayne and Carrie and Lori and all of the other participants for taking time today to attend this webinar. It's one of my favorite. It's one of my favorite to participate in. And yes, I was thinking I was thinking this morning about our meeting last year and how that was also my last in-person meeting to experience before we all adjusted to this new norm that we've all gotten accustomed to the last 12 months. So I also want to thank Carrie Wester for a great introduction. We are, I am the field office engineer for the USDA, the Natural Resources Conservation Service that my office serves both Sonoma and Marin counties here in California. And we've been talking a lot about on-farm concerns related to water quality, soil health, pasture management, manure management. And these are all things that NRCS is deeply involved with, and that is what our agency does, and the mission our agency is dedicated to is to providing people the resources and tools, assistance, both technical and financial, to address their on-farm resource concerns and make changes and improvements to address those problems. So what is NRCS and how do we fit into the picture that we've been talking about today? We were an agency that was formed in the 1930s and 1940s to address some of the concerns related to the Dust Bowl incident in our nation, and the need that the federal government saw at that time to be involved with producers to help them talk about soil quality and soil erosion issues. And so we were formed under the Department of Agriculture to provide that assistance to landowners. We were also formed in co-evolution with the resource conservation districts. They allowed us to have a local presence as the federal government with local agricultural producing communities. So that's a little bit about our history. We really did start as the Soil Conservation Service, that was our name, up until the mid-90s, and our focus was really on soil science related to soil erosion and soil quality. And then in the mid-90s, we changed our name to the Natural Resources Conservation Service to really try and capture what work we were really finding ourselves doing was reaching far beyond just soil erosion and soil quality. We were looking at other things and larger watershed-wide impacts related to those problems. So we were looking at water quality, water quantity, plant, animal communities, air quality, and also human and other impacts like energy, on-farm energy use. So we've definitely evolved over the last 25 years that we've been the Natural Resources Conservation Service. And in the mid-90s, with the change of our name, came the financial programs that we offer to agricultural producers to help them implement these changes and improvements on their land to, again, address their site-specific resource concerns. So we are a national agency under the federal government. We work alongside several other agencies under the USDA that also provide farm services to agricultural producers, but that do some different things. And if people are interested in those resources, I can definitely be reached to talk more about those other agencies. We do offer technical assistance to anyone that our agency serves in our specific geographical areas. So we are a voluntary agency as well. We are non-regulatory. And so we do not solicit our services generally to other individuals. We have to have individuals request our assistance directly. So we, that usually is how the first step in a conversation with us starts, is a direct phone call or a direct visit to our office and asking, hey, I'm interested in talking with you about some concerns I have on farm, and I'd like to look at some options that may be available, and I'd like to talk to somebody about getting some advice about what may be things to explore, depending on what my site-specific issues are. And so we do provide financial assistance to anyone that would like to engage in those programs that we provide as a service. They are annual programs that are designed, again, to help provide federal financial assistance to producers to make these improvements and changes on their land. So that conservation practices such as pasture health, rotational grazing, hedgerow planting, exclusionary fencing, those are all practices that we support with our financial dollars through our programs. Those are practices that we consider to have a myriad of beneficial impacts to the ecosystems that you all manage on farm. And so For our programs, that is the goal, is to provide those federal financial assistance dollars directly to producers who request them from us through our application program, through our application and assistance programs. So those programs are annual. The main program that NRCS administers is the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. And it is an annual program that's designed to provide opportunities for producers who have developed on-farm what we can call and term conservation plans, that are plan proposals that look at existing resource conditions related to water quality, manure management, soil health, pasture health, whatever your specific situations may be. And the conservation plan is really a proposal of prescriptions to address those concerns in a timely fashion. And so I don't want to go into too much detail, other than there is opportunities for financial support through the federal government, and we are a nationwide agency that provides service to anyone and everyone in the counties that they serve. Some of the things that we've been talking about today are definitely elements of conservation plans that we craft for our applicants who are interested in our programs. And we also, again, craft conservation plans for people who simply just would like technical assistance and some guidance on how to proceed with implementing some of these changes on farm that they would like to do. We develop manure management plans. We have also technical support providers, that are called technical service providers, that we have approved to provide technical assistance to develop those plans for the community. We provide support for certain types of fencing, for manure management practices, for constructing compost facilities, like Alayne had pointed out. And I'm so glad, Alayne, that you had pointed out the specific structures that NRCS helped to provide, because we do have our specifications on our requirements for projects that we do provide financial assistance towards. We also do a myriad of pasture and soil health practices, grazing management plans, and grazing management implementation infrastructure, such as, again, fencing, watering facilities, and the like. I also really appreciate the emphasis on plants and the use of vegetative options for addressing your on-farm resource concerns. I think it's something that sometimes is not the first option that people go to, but the myriad of benefits that plantings and strategic plantings can provide are multitude, and can have also a myriad of impacts in the ecosystem, as Alayne talked about. And so they are really exciting, and I think there's a lot of opportunity to look at spaces on farms to provide that kind of habitat enhancement that everyone can enjoy, and that provides some ecological services on farm that are beneficial to the operation as well. I want to mention that we have an extremely useful website online that was launched a few years ago, called farmers.gov. And I apologize that I don't have a better presentation today, but I did want to interact with people directly. If you are interested, I am available to help assist anyone, whether in my area or not. And there are, again, other USDA agencies that offer very different types of financial assistance that I also can help put people into contact with if they're interested. So I'm going to end with that. I just want to say thank you. I've really appreciated being part of today's discussion. It's been very inspiring to also listen to the added discussion on climate smart on-farm agricultural practices and how they relate to horse keeping facilities. So thanks again.
Thank you, Brooke. And So again, just to let everyone know, I will be sending out a resource sheet in the days following this webinar, and I'll include Brooke's contact information and the website she mentioned and all of that. So I just wanted to wait just a minute to see if we had any questions coming in for you, Brooke. Not seeing any right now, but again, if something comes up for anyone, you can write it in the Q&A box at any time during the presentations and we will get to it. Okay, so if there's nothing more you need to add, Brooke, I'll go ahead and introduce Lori Tall. She's a representative from the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Quality Control Board, and she has a lot of information about water quality and what her agency is up to. So Lori, if you are there, there she is.
I'm here.
I'll let you take it away.
Yeah. Thank you, Terry. I know everyone is hungry. It's lunchtime, and here comes the regulator talking about really dry information, but hang with me. I do have a presentation I want to go through, but I want to introduce myself. My name is Lori Tall. I'm an environmental scientist with the regional board. Our agency, I know that folks are outside of our area, but I work for a state agency and we have 9 regional boards. And I work for our local San Francisco Bay Regional Board, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But let me get my presentation going here, if I can share. And it says it's disabled, Terry. So let's see. Is there something I can change, Terry, just to share my screen? Let's see if I can do.
Sorry, I was on mute there. I was
That's
talking
okay.
to you. You should be able to change your settings at the bottom of your screen, but I'm going to go ahead and make you a co-host, and let's see if that helps.
Okay.
How's that?
Yeah, that works.
Okay.
Okay. So let me know that you're seeing the screen there. Oh, let's see, wait. There
Yep.
you go.
I can see it. I hope
All
everyone
right.
can.
It's very hard to not see faces, but I know you're all there. So, okay, so like I was saying, I work for the San Francisco Regional Water Quality Control Board, and we're a state agency, and the information I'm going to go over today is mostly pertaining to, or is all pertaining to commercial operations. So I understand that some of you, or most of you, are not a commercial operation, but the laws and regulations do still apply to everyone, of course, as far as discharging and what you can discharge and what you cannot discharge to waters of the state and the waters of the US. But the detailed information that I'm going to talk about that is more talking about permitting is just for commercial operations. And if you're outside of California, you know, we implement federal regulations as well. So you have a state agency that's just like we are. I'm sure that you have requirements and regulations that you also need to follow. And I'm sure you're probably aware of those. And if you're not, you can reach out to your environmental water agency of your state. So today I'm going to talk, the presentation is not too long, but I am going to talk about who the water board is and what we do, what kind of permitting is involved for animal facilities in our region, and then what those permits require. So just to give you a sense, if you are local, our San Francisco Bay Regional Board, this is our regional boundary, the yellow line there. And the boundaries are drawn for our state as for watersheds. So everything that drains towards the bay and in some portions of our region that drains out to the ocean is in our region. And we are the agency that enforces federal law, state law, and also our local plans. The laws are the Clean Water Act, of course, and the California Water Code. And we enforce all of those laws. We also issue permitting, and we have lots of different programs in our region that is not just for ag, but for industry, as well as treatment plants for water, groundwater remediation, landfills, lots of different things that affect water quality. So why am I here, and what does that have to do with horse boarding operations? Well, the California Water Code and also the Clean Water Act requires our agency to look at all of our water bodies, streams, rivers, lakes, creeks, and to assess them and make sure that they're meeting water quality standards, that they're not polluted with certain constituents. And if they are, then if our assessments find that they're elevated in certain constituents, then it triggers a process that we have to develop a plan to bring that water body back up to the quality that is acceptable. And that process is called a total maximum daily load process. So it's kind of a long name, but it's basically just us assessing water bodies, coming up with a plan to improve the quality, and identifying sources that need to make changes in order to reduce the pollutants entering that waterway. So we've done that in our region. We have 21 completed plans, completed TMDLs in our region, and 6 of those plans have identified mostly for bacteria and pathogens. And these 6 plans have identified animal facilities as one of the sources of that bacteria impairment. And these are those plans. So, and animals would be like mostly livestock, cows and horses, but also dog. And there's also human inputs, but these are the 4 that have identified specifically animals. And in our region, in our regional area, if you have a horse boarding operation, that's a commercial horse boarding operation in one of these watersheds, then you're required then to implement an improvement plan. And you're required to enroll in our general WDR, which is waste discharge requirements for your facility. And so that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit. So the last one on the list here, the Petaluma River TMDL, was just implemented or finished in our region last year and adopted by our regional board. And just this year, last year in 2019, and last year in June, it was just adopted by our state board. So it's now final. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that means for the folks in that watershed, because if you do have a facility in these other watersheds, you're probably already aware of what I'm talking about. But if you're in the Petaluma watershed, you're probably not. So this is I'll talk a little bit about the Petaluma watershed. This is a map of all the creeks that drain into the Petaluma River, and it is impaired by bacteria. And so our TMDL did a study, or the folks that are developing our TMDL had to study it, and they found that the levels of bacteria were 67 to 100% higher than the standards. So the uses for this river that are not being protected and that cannot be used for recreational activities without health risks. So I just kind of wanted to show you, as part of the sampling program and the assessment program, our folks do bacteria DNA source identification. And this is just, this is a chart of 2 of our seasons of sampling. And it shows that, it summarized, we identified 4 different sources of bacteria: human, horse, dog, and cow. And the chart has the % positive of samples. Of all the samples, what percentage was positive for that bacteria source. And then we separate out into seasons, whether the sample was collected in the wet season or the dry season. And as you can see, the highest levels come from horses and cows. However, the human and dog bacteria was almost only seen in the wet season, which means that it's stormwater runoff that's carrying it, most likely. But you see that horses and cows have almost the same amount of samples that are positive, regardless of the wet or the dry season. So it insinuates that maybe in the dry season, you have some discharges that are not related to storm events, or animals have access to the waterways. So if you're a facility that is in one of these watersheds that has been identified as impaired because of pathogens and bacteria, then you need to enroll in one of our permits. And if you're a grazing operation, which is not, would be more cattle, then we have a permit for that. And then we have our general WDR, which is a general waste discharge requirement permit for any type of confinable facility. So in our region, this would mostly dairies. We have all of our dairies are enrolled regardless of what watershed they're in. But then we apply it to other types of animal facilities like horses, if you're only in those watersheds that I talked about. So this is that permit, and the information for this permit, we'll talk a little bit more about it, but most of the information is on our website, and I'll give you the link for that later. So basically, it's everything you've learned today, all these great management practices and all these great tips and ideas directly relate to what we're looking for everyone to be doing on their facility. And our permit, we call it a permit, but it's basically it's guidelines for how we want you to think about the waste on your facility and where it goes, and how you can keep the clean water clean and contain dirty water so it doesn't discharge to surface waters. So all these things that you've learned directly apply to if you're one of these facilities that's required to have a waste discharge permit. All those things are going to help you comply with this permit. So these are the basic things that the permit requires. Diverting your clean water away from areas with animals and manure. And what we mean by that is that areas that your animals are confined. So your main barn area or main corral area. Containing all your manure and bedding. If you apply waste to land, a lot of dairies and some horse boarding operations will spread their compost on their pastures if they have enough acres to do so. So you have to do that in within certain specifications. And we have requirements for setbacks when you store your manure. And animals need to be kept out of creeks. You have to contain your non-storm water waste, so like your wash water, and you have to maintain your grazing lands. You need to do a ranch water quality plan when it comes to this permit. And this is what Carrie was talking about, and also Brooke. They are some of the folks that can assist you in putting together this plan. And the permit itself has some minimum standards to what should be in this plan. And it basically are the management practices that you are implementing in 4 different areas of your facility: where you keep your animals, where you store your waste, where your animals graze if they do, and if you apply your waste to land. Another component is that monitoring is required. And this seems a little overwhelming, but we've tried to structure it so that it's fairly easy to do, not very expensive, and is helpful in finding out what areas of your facility might need improvement. So we have requirements for doing visual inspections during dry seasons, during the wet season, and doing sampling events. So you might need to sample if you have a creek running through your facility or where your water discharges to a creek. You need to actually physically take samples and have them analyzed for certain pollutants. And we provide some guidance on our website as to how this is done. Folks are either can do their own sampling, or we have some facilities that have joined with other ranches in the same watershed and formed a group, and they do just a combined effort of doing their monitoring, which is really helpful and reduces the cost. So if you are in the Petaluma watershed and you're a commercial horse boarding operation, this permit requirement is going to be taking in effect this year. Last year, we were talking here in this same workshop, we talked about the fact that facilities would have to enroll last year. When COVID hit, things were pushed, things were delayed, and the final TMDL was not approved until later than we thought. And also we just, we wanted to give some people some room to really learn about this process, and with everyone at home, it wasn't going to happen. So this year we're rolling it out, and folks will be notified if they're in the watershed and they have to comply with this permit. And after you're notified, you have some time to submit what's called a notice of intent, which is our application form. And you have another year to complete your monitoring plan, and 2 years total to complete your ranch plan. And then each year you report to us just how you did during the year. You report your monitoring data, and this report that is a form that you fill out once a year, and just to tell us how things are going. So this is just a summary of that. So you have 90 days to file your notice of intent when we let you know that it applies to you. You have some things to do for the first winter season, and then as you start to develop your monitoring program and your ranch plan, hopefully next year, maybe this time next year, we can talk more specifically about what's required of you to do monitoring and ranch planning. And hopefully the RCDs and the NRCS is in its position to help with that as well. So this is our web page with all the information that I've just talked about. It has all the permitting, all the laws and the regulations, and all the forms that are necessary. And at the bottom is my contact. So if you need to email me with any questions that you have, and email is probably the best right now since we're not in the office, of course. So that's all I have. I know it's a lot of information in a short period of time, but if anyone has questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
I'm not seeing any questions yet, but I'll just give everybody a moment. Maybe somebody will type one in. Well, doesn't look like anybody's coming up with one. But thank you, Lori. Really appreciate it. And Alayne, did you want to do any kind of follow-up for closure or conclusion, or if anybody else had anything to?
Well, I would just say that I am a big advocate of using resources available, and all of these resources are wonderful resources, and it's horse owners in that area are lucky to have agencies that are reaching out and are willing to work with horse owners. In a lot of parts of the country, there's no agencies that work with horse owners. They only work with food and fiber. So that's something that California horse owners have that a lot of people don't. So take advantage of it and utilize cost sharing as well as technical assistance. And as far as resources like for the nest boxes that somebody asked about, we in the material that we send out, we can send more contact information about that. But wild bird stores are a great resource, as are local Audubon clubs are another place where people can go to find nest boxes. And I think that's about it. So I guess I would just say that that I wish everybody happy trails, and to thank them for their interest in environmentally sensitive horse keeping and sustainable land management. And I'm glad to be a part of this, and I'm glad to see so many other people that are a part of it as well.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Alayne, and all of our other panelists, Carrie and Brooke and Lori. Thank you so much for your participation today, and also to all our attendees, all of you who joined us. I hope that we were able to answer some of your questions. As I mentioned, I'll be sending out a link to this recording if you'd like to review it or watch in your own time. And I'll be sending out a resource sheet with some links to the information that our presenters mentioned. For those of you who are Facebook users, we also have a private page set up for people that have been to this webinar. If people are interested in sharing ideas and sharing their projects and keeping each other inspired to do better land management practices, we have that as well, and I'll send you the information for that. I know that I'll be seeing a few of you tomorrow who live here locally. We're doing a live tour here in Petaluma, so I'll be in touch with you about that as well. And then as we close, I have a short survey that will be launched, if you don't mind, just asking what you liked about the webinar, what you didn't like, and how we can do better for next time. Does anybody have anything else to share before we close it out? Oh, wait a second. I got a question here. Okay, Alayne. Okay, this might be a question for Alayne. I heard that turning soil isn't good for the beneficials and not good for climate. Is harrowing safe for beneficials in the environment? So I think
Yeah, they also said that they watched the movie Kiss the Ground.
Yeah.
Carrie told me about that movie. It is fantastic.
It's
I
fabulous.
highly recommend it. So harrowing isn't rototilling or ripping the soil. Harrowing is just dragging the manure so that you're spreading it on the pasture. It just breaks up the manure balls so that the pasture plants can try to break it down a little bit easier. If you leave the manure where the horse defecated, like horses try to defecate in one area, and that's called the rough. And what it does is it concentrates nutrients in that area and, doesn't distribute it evenly across the pasture. So when you harrow it, you're dragging them and spreading the nutrients all over so that hopefully the plants can all have a chance to absorb it. Hopefully that makes sense to you. And it's not, you're right that you don't want to do renovation where you're turning over where you're actually harrowing and ripping the soil. That's a last resort that usually we don't need to do anymore.
Brooke, did you have something to add?
I did just want to mention that we had a specific technical assistance request come to us from probably a medium-sized horse facility. And we were able to work with them over a period of about, I want to say 18 to 20 months. There was a lot of conversations that went back and forth. There was probably maybe 2 or 3 stages of practices that they implemented. I think starting with some hillside exclusion and some hillside seeding and compost application. And then again, some more exclusion fencing, some breaking up their pastures into smaller paddocks, providing some additional watering support to do that. And then planting some strategically selected plants at the tail end of their corrals and their paddocks that basically help to filter a lot of the sediment and manure-laden water that was coming through there. They were able to, in a short period of time, do a lot of vegetative and just management practices that I think made a big impact for them. So I just kind of wanted to point out there is still opportunity to do more, but with that time period and the conversations that we had, we also included the local RCD in those conversations. And I think we were successful at giving them something that was really useful as a prescription that they also could have an easy time managing, as well as expanding on to do in other areas of their operation. So I just wanted to point that out, that was something that was a really, that was a real-time example for me working directly with a horse keeping facility, and what we were able to accomplish without really putting a single pipe into the ground. That is, I think, appropriate for other situations, but really, again, using opportunities to apply compost and then exclusionary fencing, really paying attention to rotation in their pastures, and how to expand the opportunities they did have to do that. Anyway, I just wanted to bring that up as a real-time example that we've been involved in recently.
No, that's great. Thank you very much. Carrie, did you have something to add to that, or you can't tell if, oh.
No, not necessarily. I like hearing these conversations, and I think that kind of as Alayne said, you know, there's a lot of support here in our local area, and you know, each of us are here to help. We're here to answer questions. We do understand that the horse community and the equine facility community coming into a regulated arena is something that's new for them, and we understand the sensitivity around that. So just understand that, please ask questions, get informed, and that's what we're here for.
Great. This person is also asking about a good combination of seeds for horse pasture. I don't know where they are particularly from or where they live, but I know Sonoma County has a couple of places that do offer good native pasture seeds that we've made use of. And
yeah, I see there also, I think they're asking about a no-till drill. Is if they're in your area, do you know any place where they could have access to renting one?
Yeah, I know that the Permaculture Skill Center in Sebastopol has a no-till drill, I believe. It's there's a specific name for it. They might try that.
Name for the drill, you mean? The
yeah,
drill,
yeah, the type of machine that has that no-till.
And so if people are listening and they don't know what a no-till drill is, so what this participant is saying and what they cover in the movie is that we've learned in the last 10 years or so how destructive it is to plow up soil and to renovate and rotivate for crops or anything like that. It destroys all the beneficial microbes and the macroinvertebrates like the worms and things that would be there. It destroys all of that habitat. And what's better is if you need to plant something, you use it's called a no-till drill, and it just goes across the top and it just stuffs the little seed in the ground, and it doesn't rototill anything up. And that's much better for soil structure. But they're a little tricky to use, and normal people don't have them. You have to have someplace that has them, like a RCD or another office that rents them out, and then you have to have some specialized instruction to utilize them.
I will add that Goldridge RCD in our area does have a no-till drill that is available for rental. I think it's a Great Plains. I think it's like 6 feet wide, and I can include information on that to Terry to send out. But yeah, like Alayne's saying, there are certain, you have to have a tractor to pull it, and certain things that you should be aware of when operating it. But that is an opportunity here in Sonoma County.
Great, that's great. Anybody else have any questions? Any of the attendees, participants have any questions for our panel? Just wait a moment to see if any.
Carrie, what about for a resource? Do you want to mention that informal group that you meet with?
Oh,
the
sure.
Sustainable Ranchers.
Yeah, sure. For those people that live in my area around Sonoma County, I do a once a month or once every other month gathering. They're free to the public with a rancher named Richard King, who's a kind of a land management guru of best land management practices. And he knows a lot about really great land management, about grazing management. So when I send you the resource sheet, I'll include that in there, and anybody who's interested in those, please let me know, and I'll just send you the notices when we put one of those together. And like I said, anybody's welcome to attend, and we meet outside and we're masked and social distanced, but anybody's willing to attend.
And Terry, do you want to say in a nutshell maybe about your swale that you've built on your property?
Yeah, well, so that's one of the things that that I have on the Facebook page. I post pictures of my projects here that I do on the property where I live. And I've done a number of swales, different types of swales to capture water from rooftops. It's a little more physical. You have to actually dig them up yourself, but it's a lot less expensive. You can direct all the rainwater that comes off your roof into these swales and then direct them to things you might have growing, like in your orchard or your gardens, or a place in your pasture that can contain a lot of water that you might have plants to absorb that water. But it's a wonderful water conservation tool. So again, if you have any interest in being on that private Facebook page, or you just want to contact me and have me share some of that with you, I'm happy to do that. A swale is just a ditch, like Alayne mentioned, but it's done on a contour. So it's something that is designed to hold water and slow the water down so that it sinks into the ground more thoroughly, and then provides water to plants farther into the dry season. So it requires then less water. And you can direct the swales to different areas, places that need water on your property. It's a great way to hold the water onto your land and sink it into the ground, replenish groundwater, as well as just watering needs.
And sometime in the future, when we're all back together again and I'm there, or I guess I don't have to be there, you could still, what I'm going to suggest is that we do a farm tour at your place and the land that you manage, because Terry manages, what she does is she has gotten all of her neighbors to cooperate, and Terry manages sheep, but she's still doing a wonderful, sustainable job. And she moves them around through all these little paddocks or grazing areas between her and her neighbors. And she has a system of gates, and she does that so that pastures don't get overgrazed, and so that they're utilizing the grass and the land.
Yeah, so we have a combination of about, there are 4 of us neighbors. We have a combined acreage of about 20 acres of pasture between the 4 of us. And we happen to have gates that open up into each other's properties. So we move the sheep, and we actually do also have cattle and goats now too, that we move through the property. And I separate the pastures with electric fence, with electric netting. And so that we can, manage the area that they are grazing and how long they're there, and when they get moved off the land, and how long the land is then rested afterwards. And it's been great. We used to mow like crazy, and now none of us have to mow anymore. So it's been a great help.
Saving fossil fuel and
sequestering carbon, building soil.
Yes.
It's been really a great project.
I took some really sweet pictures. I should have thought to have them. I could have shown them real quickly here, but last year of her sheep lambing when I was there, that was beautiful and really sweet. Yeah. All right.
Brooke, did you have anything more you wanted to add, or are you just hanging out there? Or are you...
I am, just hearing you talk there, I want to mention it's somewhat of a newer program through the Farm Bill that NRCS administers. So EQIP's our big program that is very project-based, but we have another program called the called the Conservation Stewardship Program. And the idea is that producers already, as part of their operation, tend to do a good amount of baseline conservation work. And so the idea is that this is not a project-based reimbursement, it's an acreage-based reimbursement. And what we do is we look at what your current management is, both leased land and owned land. And we look at kind of what are you currently doing that is practices that we consider good conservation work. So we get an idea of what that baseline is. And there can potentially be a per acre, an annual payment based on the acreage enrolled in this program that goes out to you every year for up to 5 years. Now, while EQIP is a very project-based program, this is an enhancement-based program. So the idea, you give a great example. So the idea is you're already doing a certain amount of rotational grazing. And so what we would want to do is capture that in a plan, basically just write it down. And a lot of people have already done that in terms of how they're moving animals, what the size of the lots are, or areas are that they're moving them into, and for how many days, and how many animals are in there. So, and what's interesting that you bring up is now you're introducing other animals that goats tend to eat very different things than sheep do. And so that's also a very interesting thing that can also be captured in this program, as well as in certain practices in EQIP. But the idea is that CSP captures your baseline conservation routine that you already implement on your own. And then we look at opportunities to enhance what you already do. And so let me give you an example. We've been discussing a lot of weed control issues in pasture with producers. And so that are doing some type of rotational grazing for pasture use and forage use while it's available to them. And so what we do is then, okay, maybe we take an inventory of the weeds that are problematic in certain pastures. We look at your grazing plan that you're already implementing and seeing when those pastures are being used. And we look at opportunities to potentially improve that or match it better with maybe certain species you want to control that flower or go to seed at certain times of the year. Anyway, this is sort of one of the options that are available, but the idea is that we look at your baseline conditions and we look at some opportunities to enhance, and it's really photo documentation. So we would, let's say, pick a pasture or two to do this in, where we're gonna look at more timed management based on weed control and also forage availability based on what your grazing plan tells us we can do. So then that would be considered an enhancement that you would also fold into your annual acreage-based payment that you would receive for this program. And it's kind of hard to describe because it's not project-based, but once we start engaging with you and looking at what you're already doing, and again, Terry, what you're doing with your neighbors is kind of already a really good example. And so there's an annual payment that's available to you to do that activity, and some of these enhancements that are photo documented over the course of 5 years as you receive this annual payment based on the acreage that's enrolled in this program.
Wow.
I know that's a mouthful.
So I should contact you.
Absolutely. I would love to work with you on something like this. It's newer and we're getting more familiar with how it works every year as we move through it. But we do find a lot of producers are using it very much for the activities that you are describing, including soil and pasture health enhancement. We have people in the vineyard community that are looking at irrigation water conservation management. So looking at how to enhance what they already have that's pretty efficient. So, and then there's ways that we can sort of pair what's in CSP in with EQIP, depending on what is the prescription that sort of unfolds during our conversation as we look at what your specific conditions are on farm. So it is it's a new mechanism for financial assistance that's not, again, project-based. So there's not a specific expenditure that's really required on your end. It's more of a time management thought investment that's required, if that makes sense on a sort of abstract level. It is easier once we sort of go through the conversations to see how this program works, but we do have to have those conversations specifically. It is hard to talk in abstracts because everybody's operation is so different. So.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
And I just mentioned to our attendees that all of the things, the grazing project that I spoke about can be done with horses too. We just don't happen to have the fencing at this time for horses, but it could just as easily be done with horses. Well, maybe not just as easily, but horses is always there's a little extra step there. But it can be done with horses just like it can be with any grazing animal. So just wanted to mention that to folks.
And I also wanted to mention some resources that may be available to folks for seeding recommendations locally. We have a very wonderful UC Cooperative Extension staff that has advisors that I think may be available to people to give some on-farm prescriptions. And we also have staff that's available to do that.
Fabulous. That's a great resource. Thank you. Alayne, any further thoughts?
No, I think we've covered it all. That sounds good.
Yeah.
So hopefully we've got everybody set to go in the good direction, and they know where to go for resources, and hopefully they'll keep in touch.
Sounds great. Well, thank you all again very much, panelists and attendees. Really appreciate you being here. And again, give us feedback. I'd like to know how we can improve for next time.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you,
And
guys.
Thank you, Daily Axe, too.
Yeah.
And
Thank you, everyone.
everybody.
It was a real pleasure.
Thanks, Brooke. Thanks, Alayne. Thanks, Lori.
Of course, thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
Have a
all.
good weekend. Bye-bye.